He had just left the small downtown office where he had spent the evening, finalizing plans for a new community center. The city streets were quiet, only a few cars passing by, and the air had the cool bite of an early spring night. He adjusted the strap of his bag over his shoulder and walked with a calm, confident pace, enjoying the brief moment of peace after a long day of meetings and site inspections. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, remnants of a light drizzle earlier in the evening, and he felt a sense of satisfaction thinking about the project he had helped bring to life. As he rounded the corner toward the residential block where he lived, 2 police officers emerged from a patrol car parked near the curb. They called out to him, their voices firm and unyielding. He stopped, instinctively raising his hand slightly, signaling he meant no harm. There was no indication that he had done anything wrong, no alarm or warning, yet the officers approached him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Good evening, sir. We need to ask you a few questions," one officer said. The tone was polite, but the rigid posture and sudden appearance made it clear this was no routine check. He responded calmly, explaining that he was walking home after work and had done nothing to draw attention. The officers, however, seemed uninterested in listening. One of them stepped closer, blocking his path. "We need to see some identification," he demanded. He reached into his bag and handed over his wallet, showing his ID and briefly mentioning his profession. The officers glanced at it but said nothing, their expressions unreadable. Something about the way they looked at him made him feel a wave of unease. There was a tension in the air, a sense that the situation could escalate at any moment. He kept his voice steady, answering questions politely, trying to de-escalate the interaction. But the officer's demeanor became sharper, less patient. Words were exchanged, short and clipped, until one officer's tone rose, a mix of suspicion and anger that seemed completely unprovoked. Then it happened. One officer grabbed his arm roughly, ignoring his protests. He tried to pull away, but the grip tightened. He felt a rush of fear, confusion, and disbelief. He had always believed in the integrity of the system, in the idea that following the rules and living honestly would protect him. But that belief was being challenged in the most brutal way. He stumbled, his balance thrown off by the unexpected force, and a hand pressed against his chest, pinning him. He looked around, hoping for intervention, and saw a few bystanders watching from across the street. Some were frozen in shock, others hesitated, unsure of what to do. A couple of people raised their phones, recording the incident. In that moment, he realized that if this encounter were to be witnessed, the truth might come to light. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising panic inside him, but the officers were relentless. One officer began shouting, accusing him of resisting. He tried to speak, to explain that he had done nothing, but the words were drowned out by the officer's voice. The physical force continued, and he felt pain shoot through his arm and back. He winced but focused on breathing, reminding himself that fighting back physically could worsen the situation. He was not a fighter, and he had never been in a situation like this before. The sounds of the city seemed distant now. The drizzle, the hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, all fading as the intensity of the moment consumed him. He felt humiliated and powerless, emotions that burned deep, mingled with anger and disbelief. He was an architect, a creator, someone who had dedicated his life to building and improving communities. And here he was, treated as though he were a threat simply for existing in the space he had every right to occupy. The bystanders' presence offered a small measure of comfort. Their phones continued to record, their eyes wide, some whispering to each other. He understood that in those recordings, the truth of what was happening could survive. Even if the officers tried to distort it later, he wished he could say something clever, assertive to make the officers stop. But words seemed useless against the physical dominance being exerted over him. Minutes stretched in a way that felt both endless and incredibly brief. Pain and fear intertwined with the thought that this encounter could define the night, perhaps even his sense of safety in the city. He tried to remember that he had faced challenges before in his career and life, and he had always found a way through. This was different, though. This was power wielded against him arbitrarily, and it was a stark reminder of the realities that so many people lived with daily. Then a sudden shift occurred. The officer's attention flicked to something else, a car door slamming, a passerby's shout, and he took the opportunity to steady himself. He remained calm, breathing deliberately, refusing to give them more reason to escalate further. The fear had not vanished, but a small part of him realized that endurance, patience, and the awareness that witnesses were present might help him survive this encounter with dignity intact. Eventually, the officers released him, muttering under their breath, stepping back as if the immediate threat had passed. He straightened, checking himself for injuries, rubbing his arm where it had been grabbed and trying to compose his thoughts. His heart raced, adrenaline still coursing through his body, but he felt a surge of relief mixed with anger and humiliation. This should not have happened. None of it made sense. He took a moment to thank the bystanders, their presence a quiet shield against further aggression. They nodded, some offering words of encouragement, others just standing silently, sharing a mutual understanding that they had witnessed something wrong. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and resumed his walk home. Slower this time, each step measured, aware of every sound, every shadow. By the time he reached his apartment, he felt the weight of the evening pressing down on him. Pain in his arm and back reminded him of the brutality he had endured, while the sting of humiliation lingered more sharply in his mind. He knew he would need to rest, to process, to figure out the next steps. But he also knew that this night would not remain hidden. There were recordings, witnesses, and a truth that demanded to be recognized. Sitting at his kitchen table, he reached for his phone, his fingers shaking slightly. Messages from friends and colleagues began to arrive, some concerned, some demanding details. He typed carefully, recounting the facts with precision. This was important. This was not about revenge. It was about truth, about ensuring that what had happened could not be swept under the rug. He thought about the broader implications, about the trust he had placed in those sworn to protect the public. It was shaken, perhaps irreparably, but he also realized that his voice mattered, that sharing his experience could spark awareness and accountability. The fear lingered, but alongside it was a resolve to see justice done, not just for himself but for the community he cared about. As the night deepened, he prepared for what might come next. Calls would be made, statements given, and the incident would become a public matter. He understood the risks of speaking out, but he also understood the cost of silence. He had faced obstacles before, solved problems that seemed insurmountable, and he drew on that strength now. The city outside continued its quiet rhythm, unaware of the small but significant confrontation that had just occurred. He sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. Fear, anger, humiliation, they were natural responses, yet beneath them all was a determination that had never faltered. This night would be remembered, not just for the injustice, but for the courage it inspired. And as he looked out the window at the street he had walked only hours before, he knew that the next steps, though daunting, were his to take, and he would take them with care, with resolve, and with an unshakable sense of his own dignity. He could still feel the tension from the evening pressing on him as he sat at his kitchen table. The pain in his arm and back throbbed, but it was the humiliation that weighed heaviest. He replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, wondering how something so ordinary, a simple walk home, had escalated into such a terrifying ordeal. He knew he had done nothing wrong, and yet he had been treated as a threat, attacked without cause. The injustice of it all stirred anger and fear in equal measure. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues. Each notification brought a mix of concern and support. Some asked if he was okay, while others urged him to report the incident immediately. He read each message carefully, appreciating the kindness and urgency behind them. The architect understood that documenting what had happened was essential. This was not just for himself, but for the truth to be acknowledged and for accountability to take place. He made a decision. He would report the assault, provide the evidence he had, and ensure that witnesses' statements were collected. It would not be an easy process. He knew from experience that the system could be slow, resistant, and sometimes indifferent. Yet the videos taken by bystanders offered some measure of protection and credibility. He could not let fear silence him. He had to act. The following morning, he contacted a lawyer he trusted, someone who had helped him navigate professional contracts and disputes before. Explaining the situation, he recounted every detail: the officer's words, the physical contact, the bystanders' reactions. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding and taking notes, and reassured him that they could move forward with a formal complaint. It was a small relief to hear that someone believed him, and would take steps to support his case. While waiting for legal guidance, he also reached out to the police department's Internal Affairs Division. The process was bureaucratic, filled with forms and procedural questions, but he answered each one with clarity and precision. The aim was to make sure that the incident was officially recorded and that there would be an investigation. The thought that those responsible could face consequences gave him a sense of hope amidst the lingering fear and humiliation. Meanwhile, news of the assault began to spread locally. The bystanders who had filmed the encounter shared their videos on social media, and the story caught the attention of community groups and neighborhood forums. People were shocked, many expressing outrage and disbelief that such an event could occur. Comments poured in, some sympathetic, others questioning the details. But overall, there was a growing sense of concern and solidarity. He felt the weight of being thrust into the public eye, something he had never sought. Yet it was a necessary step for the truth to be acknowledged. At home, he struggled with his emotions. Nights were the hardest. Memories of the assault replayed vividly, and he had trouble sleeping. The pain in his body was minor compared to the mental strain, the feeling of being overpowered, humiliated, and unfairly targeted. He reminded himself to breathe, to focus on facts and evidence, and to channel his energy into constructive action. He could not change what had happened, but he could influence what came next. He also reached out to friends and family for emotional support. Their voices on the phone, their words of encouragement provided comfort. They reminded him that he was not alone and that speaking up was brave, not reckless. He realized that sharing the burden helped lessen it, that isolation only amplified fear and anxiety. Each conversation, each message, strengthened his resolve to move forward with integrity and courage. At the same time, he could not ignore the practical challenges. His work had to continue despite the emotional upheaval. Meetings, deadlines, and design reviews awaited, and he had to maintain his professional responsibilities. It was difficult to concentrate, but he found that immersing himself in his work offered a temporary refuge, a way to reclaim a sense of normalcy and control over his life. Community response grew steadily. Local activists began discussing the incident, highlighting the importance of accountability and fair treatment for all citizens. News outlets contacted him for interviews, seeking to understand the story and its implications. He approached each request cautiously, mindful of protecting his privacy while emphasizing the broader issues at play. His goal was not to seek personal attention, but to ensure that the narrative remained truthful and focused on the injustice he had experienced. As the days passed, he felt a growing sense of responsibility. His personal experience had become a catalyst for a larger conversation about abuse of power, systemic issues, and the need for vigilance in protecting civil rights. He was no longer just an individual facing a wrong. He was part of a community's push for accountability and reform. The thought was daunting, but it also imbued him with purpose. One afternoon, he met with the lawyer to review the next steps. They discussed filing a formal complaint against the officers and preparing for potential legal proceedings. Evidence from videos, witness statements, and medical reports would form the backbone of the case. The lawyer reassured him that they had a strong foundation, but also warned that the process might be slow and challenging. Despite the uncertainty, he felt a measure of empowerment in knowing that action was being taken, that the system could work in his favor if navigated carefully. Evenings were still filled with reflection and quiet contemplation. He often walked to the window, looking out at the street where the incident had occurred. The place that had once been familiar now carried the weight of trauma, yet he refused to let it dominate his life. He reminded himself that resilience was not about forgetting what happened, but about moving forward with awareness and strength. In the neighborhood, conversations about the assault sparked discussions among residents, business owners, and local leaders. People shared their own experiences, concerns, and ideas for preventing similar incidents. Community meetings were organized, social media campaigns gained traction, and there was a sense of collective effort to address injustice. He participated when possible, lending his voice and perspective, balancing personal recovery with the broader need for awareness and change. Throughout it all, he remained mindful of his own well-being. Therapy sessions provided a space to process trauma and explore strategies for managing anxiety and fear. Physical exercise helped release tension, and meditation offered moments of calm. He realized that taking care of himself was essential, not just for recovery, but for sustaining his ability to advocate effectively. Despite the challenges, he began to notice small signs of progress. Calls from the police department indicated that the complaint was being taken seriously, and the internal investigation had begun. Community support continued to grow, and the story attracted attention beyond the local area. These developments offered reassurance that his actions were meaningful and that the incident would not be ignored. He reflected on the broader meaning of what had happened. The assault was not just a personal violation, it was a reflection of deeper systemic issues that demanded attention. He felt a renewed commitment to using his experience to highlight these problems, to ensure that others would not face similar injustices without recourse. The experience had altered his perspective, deepening his understanding of resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for truth. As the week drew to a close, he began to plan the next steps. Meetings with legal advisors, discussions with community leaders, and careful media engagement were all on the agenda. He understood the weight of responsibility, but he also recognized the opportunity to effect positive change. The fear and anger remained, but they were tempered by a sense of purpose and determination. Late at night, he finally allowed himself moments of quiet reflection. Sitting in his living room, he thought about the night that had changed everything, about the strangers who had watched and recorded, about the friends and colleagues who had supported him. He felt a deep appreciation for their presence and for the strength that had carried him through the immediate aftermath. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, armed with truth, resilience, and the support of a community that believed in justice. The morning after the local news picked up the story, the city was buzzing with conversations about what had happened. Citizens discussed it over coffee, on buses, and in offices. People were shocked, angry, and curious. Many were trying to understand why a respected architect had been treated so violently without cause. The mayor's office could no longer ignore the growing attention. Calls from reporters and concerned citizens had reached the mayor, urging immediate action. The weight of public opinion was undeniable, and the mayor knew that prompt intervention was necessary. Inside City Hall, the mayor convened a meeting with senior staff, police leadership, and advisors. The discussion was serious and urgent. The mayor's voice was calm but firm, emphasizing the importance of acting decisively and transparently. The first priority, the mayor said, was ensuring a fair and thorough investigation into the officers' behavior. There was no room for delay or ambiguity. The incident had shaken the community, and public trust in law enforcement was at stake. The mayor insisted that the officers involved be placed on immediate administrative leave while the investigation proceeded. This decision was met with murmurs in the room, some questioning the impact on police morale, others emphasizing the need for accountability. The mayor remained steadfast, highlighting the responsibility to the citizens above all else. Protecting public trust and ensuring justice for the victim were paramount. As the meeting continued, plans were made to issue a public statement. The mayor carefully drafted words that acknowledged the seriousness of the assault, expressed concern for the victim, and outlined the steps the city would take. The message was meant to reassure the public that abuse of power would not be tolerated, while also reinforcing the principles of fairness and due process. Meanwhile, the architect was contacted by the mayor's office. A representative expressed concern and offered support, ensuring him that the city recognized the severity of what had occurred. The architect appreciated the gesture, feeling a mix of relief and cautious optimism. He knew that having the mayor's attention could significantly impact the investigation and help bring justice more swiftly. Public reaction intensified as news of the mayor's involvement spread. Community leaders, activists, and citizens praised the decisive action. Social media platforms were filled with discussions about accountability, transparency, and the need for systemic change. The mayor's office carefully monitored responses, acknowledging both support and criticism, and reinforcing their commitment to a fair investigation. The city was alive with dialogue, the incident now a catalyst for broader conversations about civil rights and law enforcement. At the police department, the decision to place the officers on leave created tension. Internal memos circulated, some officers expressing frustration, others remaining silent. Leadership reminded staff of the importance of professionalism adherence to procedure, and cooperation with the investigation. The department recognized the delicate balance between maintaining order within the force and responding to public outrage. The mayor's direct involvement underscored the seriousness of the situation and made it clear that any misconduct would be addressed. The architect, meanwhile, continued to process his experience and plan his next steps. Meetings with his lawyer became more frequent as they prepared for the investigation. They compiled evidence, reviewed videos from witnesses, and documented the physical and emotional impact of the assault. Every detail mattered, and meticulous preparation was essential. While the legal process would take time, the architect understood the importance of laying a strong foundation to ensure accountability. Community support remained unwavering. Neighbors and local groups organized gatherings to discuss the incident and the broader issue of police accountability. Flyers were posted, social media campaigns gained momentum, and local businesses voiced support for justice. The architect attended some meetings, sharing his perspective and encouraging a focus on constructive solutions. He emphasized that the goal was not retaliation, but fairness, awareness, and systemic improvement. The mayor's office coordinated closely with the Internal Affairs Division of the police department. Investigators began reviewing footage, interviewing witnesses, and collecting statements. The process was thorough and methodical, designed to ensure that the truth would be revealed. The mayor insisted on regular updates, emphasizing transparency and accountability at every stage. Public confidence depended on the perception that the investigation would be fair, impartial, and complete. Throughout the city, discussions continued about the implications of the incident. Civic organizations held forums to educate citizens on their rights and avenues for reporting misconduct. Schools incorporated discussions about respect, authority, and community responsibility. Religious institutions and community centers hosted dialogue sessions, encouraging understanding and empathy. The assault had sparked not only outrage but also a broader examination of how power was exercised and how citizens could advocate for justice. The architect found himself reflecting on the ripple effects of the incident. His personal ordeal had become a symbol for many, highlighting issues that had long been overlooked. While he had not sought attention, he recognized the potential to influence positive change. He engaged carefully with media outlets, providing factual accounts without exaggeration, ensuring that the narrative remained accurate and centered on accountability. As the investigation progressed, pressure on the officers involved increased. Union representatives were involved, advocating for due process but also acknowledging the need for a thorough review. The mayor emphasized that no one was above scrutiny and that the city's commitment to justice was non-negotiable. The balance between protecting individual rights and upholding public trust was delicate but essential. The architect's daily routine continued, interwoven with legal meetings and community engagement. He managed the emotional toll through mindfulness, exercise, and support from friends and family. Each day brought new developments, whether updates from the lawyer, news coverage, or messages of support from the community. He felt a growing sense of empowerment, recognizing that his actions and voice contributed to the city's broader efforts to address misconduct and ensure fairness. Late one afternoon, the mayor held a press conference. Cameras flashed, reporters asked pointed questions, and citizens tuned in eagerly. The mayor spoke clearly and firmly, condemning the assault, affirming the city's commitment to justice, and outlining the steps being taken. The public statement resonated with many, reinforcing confidence in leadership and signaling that the city would not tolerate abuse of power. The architect watched the coverage, feeling a mix of validation and cautious optimism. In the days that followed, the architect received calls and messages from individuals and groups beyond the city, expressing support and sharing similar experiences. These connections were humbling and affirming. They reminded him that his struggle was part of a larger pattern, and that advocacy and awareness could inspire meaningful change. The investigation continued steadily. Witnesses were interviewed, statements were taken, and evidence was carefully cataloged. The process was meticulous, ensuring that conclusions would be based on facts and not assumptions. The mayor remained engaged, receiving regular briefings and providing guidance to ensure transparency. The architect stayed informed through his lawyer, maintaining a careful balance between participation and personal well-being. Community initiatives also gained momentum. Workshops on civil rights, Training for law enforcement on de-escalation and public forums for dialogue became more frequent. The architect contributed where he could, sharing insights and supporting educational efforts. He understood that systemic change required time, patience, and sustained engagement. The assault had been the spark, but the response had the potential to foster lasting improvement. As weeks passed, the city began to see the tangible effects of mayoral intervention. The investigation progressed without obstruction. Public trust was cautiously restored, and conversations about accountability remained at the forefront. The architect reflected on the journey, recognizing the importance of courage, resilience, and community support. The mayor's decisive action had been crucial, demonstrating that leadership could make a difference when it prioritized justice and fairness. He continued to balance professional responsibilities with his role in advocating for transparency. Each day was a mixture of normal work, legal consultations, and engagement with community efforts. He remained mindful of self-care, ensuring that the emotional strain did not overwhelm him. The experience had changed him, deepening his understanding of the power dynamics in society and the importance of standing up for what is right. By the end of the month, the city had seen a noticeable shift in conversation. Discussions about police accountability, systemic reform, and community oversight were more widespread and informed. Citizens felt empowered to speak up, and leadership demonstrated that responsiveness and transparency were not just ideals, but actionable commitments. The architect felt a sense of cautious optimism, aware that the journey was far from over, but confident that meaningful progress was possible. He realized that the assault, while deeply traumatic, had become a turning point, not only for him but for the city. It had brought attention to the need for vigilance, accountability, and courage in the face of abuse of power. With the mayor's intervention, the community's support, and his own perseverance, he understood that change could begin, slowly but surely, in ways that would ripple beyond a single incident. The city streets were alive with conversation as the story of the assault continued to spread. The architect had become a recognizable figure, not because he sought attention, but because the incident had thrust him into the public eye. Everywhere he went, people approached him, neighbors, colleagues, and even strangers, offering words of support and expressing their outrage. He was struck by the sense of solidarity, a realization that his experience resonated with a larger community that had long endured injustice quietly. Local media continued to cover the story extensively. News outlets ran detailed reports highlighting the incident, the mayor's decisive response, and the steps being taken to ensure accountability. Interviews with witnesses, recordings from bystanders, and statements from advocacy groups provided a comprehensive view of the event. The architect participated selectively in these interviews, always careful to focus on facts and justice rather than personal emotions. He wanted the narrative to remain centered on accountability and systemic issues, rather than sensationalism. Community organizations sprang into action. They organized forums, discussions, and workshops about citizen rights and police accountability. Attendance at these events grew steadily, with people of all ages participating. The architect attended several meetings, sharing his story and emphasizing the importance of maintaining composure while advocating for justice. He spoke about resilience, fairness, and the need to ensure that such incidents would not be ignored or repeated. His words inspired others to engage actively and constructively. Social media was flooded with messages of support. Videos and articles were shared widely, sparking discussions not just within the city but nationally. Citizens debated the role of law enforcement, the importance of oversight, and the need for systemic reform. While some online discussions became heated, the overall tone emphasized solidarity, advocacy, and awareness. The architect observed these conversations carefully, sometimes joining to clarify facts, but mostly listening to understand the community's concerns and perspectives. The impact of the assault extended to professional circles as well. Colleagues reached out expressing disbelief and concern. Clients and partners reassured him of their continued trust and support. The architect appreciated these gestures, understanding that his professional reputation remained intact despite the public nature of the incident. This support reinforced his sense of stability and gave him the confidence to continue engaging in both his work and advocacy. Local leaders and officials began holding meetings with community members to discuss broader issues raised by the assault. Police leadership participated in some of these discussions, addressing questions, clarifying procedures, and outlining steps to prevent similar incidents. The dialogue was sometimes tense, but overall it was constructive, aimed at fostering trust and transparency. The architect attended a few of these sessions, observing carefully and offering input when appropriate, always mindful of the balance between advocacy and professionalism. The mayor continued to play a central role. Regular briefings kept the public informed, and press conferences emphasized the city's commitment to justice. The mayor's presence reassured citizens that leadership was responsive, serious, and accountable. The architect felt that the intervention had made a tangible difference, providing momentum for both the investigation and broader discussions about systemic reform. Witnesses who had recorded the incident provided their statements to investigators. Their testimonies, combined with video evidence, created a clear record of events. The architect was grateful for their courage, knowing that their actions had helped ensure that the truth would not be distorted. He encouraged others to come forward if they had relevant information, emphasizing the importance of documentation and honesty in the pursuit of justice. As media coverage continued, the architect also became aware of the risks of public exposure. False claims, rumors, and online criticism occasionally surfaced. He approached these challenges with patience and clarity, responding when necessary to correct misinformation and remaining focused on the core issues of accountability and reform. Friends, colleagues, and legal advisors provided guidance, helping him navigate the complexities of public scrutiny without compromising his personal or professional integrity. Community initiatives expanded beyond immediate discussions. Workshops on civil rights, citizen advocacy, and respectful interactions with law enforcement became regular events. Schools incorporated lessons about empathy, justice, and civic responsibility. Local organizations partnered with legal experts to educate citizens about their rights and how to report misconduct safely. The architect contributed by sharing his experience in these settings, highlighting the importance of calm, evidence-based advocacy and the power of community support. The architect also dedicated time to personal reflection. He journaled about his experiences, documenting both the challenges and the lessons learned. This practice helped him process emotions, track progress, and maintain a sense of clarity. He recognized that while the assault had been traumatic, it had also provided an opportunity to influence positive change and to participate actively in a movement that sought to prevent future injustices. Family and friends remained a crucial support system. Their encouragement and presence provided comfort, helping him manage stress and anxiety. Conversations with loved ones reminded him that he was not alone, that his voice and actions mattered, and that resilience was a collective strength. These interactions reinforced his commitment to advocacy and to maintaining personal well-being amidst public attention. At work, he continued his professional responsibilities with determination. Balancing legal and advocacy efforts with design projects and client commitments was challenging, but necessary. Immersing himself in work provided a sense of normalcy and control, helping him navigate the uncertainty and emotional strain caused by the assault and its aftermath. The support from colleagues and clients reinforced his belief that integrity, skill, and dedication would carry him through even the most difficult times. The investigation into the officer's conduct progressed steadily. Internal Affairs reviewed evidence, interviewed witnesses, and evaluated statements with care. The mayor emphasized transparency and fairness, ensuring that the process remained impartial. Updates were provided to the public at regular intervals, reinforcing confidence that justice was being pursued diligently. The architect followed the developments closely, feeling reassured by the meticulous approach and the growing sense of accountability. Community dialogue also addressed broader societal issues. Conversations explored systemic inequalities, the importance of empathy, and ways to foster trust between citizens and law enforcement. Civic organizations facilitated discussions about reform, emphasizing the need for ongoing engagement and education. The architect contributed thoughtfully, advocating for solutions grounded in fairness, evidence, and mutual respect. As weeks passed, the public attention began to translate into meaningful initiatives. New programs focused on training law enforcement in de-escalation techniques, fostering transparency, and encouraging community engagement. Citizens became more proactive in attending meetings, participating in discussions, and advocating for accountability. The architect witnessed the gradual shift, recognizing that his personal experience had become a catalyst for broader change, inspiring others to act responsibly and constructively. Throughout this period, the architect remained vigilant about self-care. Therapy sessions provided space to process trauma, while exercise and meditation helped manage stress. Maintaining a balance between advocacy, professional work, and personal well-being was essential. He understood that sustained engagement required emotional resilience and that caring for himself was a necessary part of contributing meaningfully to the community. As the city continued to respond, the architect reflected on the power of collective action. The combination of media coverage, community support, mayoral intervention, and legal diligence created a framework for accountability. The incident had sparked fear and anger, but it had also inspired collaboration, dialogue, and a renewed commitment to justice. He felt a sense of cautious optimism, aware that change was gradual but possible when individuals and institutions worked together with integrity. By the end of the month, community efforts had gained significant traction. Workshops, forums, and educational initiatives continued, creating spaces for citizens to engage, learn, and advocate. The architect participated when appropriate, sharing his perspective and encouraging others to remain calm, evidence-driven, and persistent. The city's response demonstrated that accountability could be enforced, that public voices mattered, and that leadership could act decisively when principles were prioritized over convenience. He continued to balance public advocacy with private reflection. Sitting in his apartment one evening, he thought about the incident, the support he had received, and the progress being made. Fear and anger had been transformed into purpose and action. He understood that his experience had become part of a larger narrative about justice, resilience, and the importance of speaking truth to power. While the journey was far from complete, he felt empowered by the knowledge that individual courage, combined with community support and responsible leadership, could make a meaningful difference. Months had passed since the night of the assault, and the city had undergone a noticeable shift. The investigation into the officers' conduct had reached its conclusions, and the results were being shared with the public. The officers involved faced serious consequences, including suspension, reassignment, and internal disciplinary measures. Legal proceedings were underway, and the architect understood that accountability had finally been enforced. While it could not erase the trauma he had experienced, it offered a sense of justice and closure. The architect reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The initial fear and humiliation had been profound, yet he had navigated the aftermath with courage, support, and careful action. He remembered the bystanders who had filmed the assault, the friends and family who had offered encouragement, the lawyers who had guided him, and the mayor who had acted decisively. Each element had contributed to the outcome and reinforced the idea that standing up for truth, even in the face of intimidation, could yield meaningful results.